The father held out his daughter's arm like he was showing a horse's leg at auction. "Strong back," he said. "Good teeth." The men laughed. The girl did not move. She had learned a long time ago that moving made it worse. She had also learned not to look at faces. Faces told you too much about what was coming. So she looked at the ground, and she waited. 20 people stood in that street, and not one of them said a word, until a stranger pushed through the crowd, stopped directly in front of her, and asked the one question nobody in her entire life had thought to ask. "Did anyone ever ask you what you wanted?" She had no answer, because no one ever had. If that question stopped you, subscribe right now, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Red Hollow, Montana, 1883, and find out what one question can do to a life that has been told, it doesn't matter. Elias Ward had not planned to be in Red Hollow that Tuesday. He had planned to get his supplies from the general store, load the wagon, and be back on the mountain road before noon. That was the entirety of his plan. Get the flour, the salt, the ammunition, the few things a man living alone on a 40-acre ranch in the Montana foothills needed to survive another winter, and leave. He did not plan to stop. He did not plan to get involved. He had spent 3 years building a life specifically designed around not getting involved, and he had been reasonably successful at it, and he intended to continue being successful at it for as long as possible, which he privately hoped would be the rest of his life. He had his reasons. He always had his reasons. He heard the crowd before he saw it. Not a violent sound. Nothing breaking, no shouting. Just the particular murmur of a group of people who have gathered around something and have collectively decided to observe rather than intervene. Elias knew that sound. He had heard it in other contexts in other years, and it never preceded anything good. He told himself to keep walking. He kept walking for approximately 30 feet. Then he stopped. He stood in the middle of the main street of Red Hollow, Montana, with his list of supplies in his coat pocket and his wagon hitched outside the general store. And he listened to the murmur, and something in the quality of it, something specific and cold, made him turn around. The crowd was gathered outside the feed store. Maybe 20 people, mostly men, a few women who were watching from a careful distance. The way women watched things they found uncomfortable, but did not feel they had the standing to stop. In the middle of the crowd stood a man Elias didn't know, heavy-set, red-faced, with the look of someone who had been drinking since morning and had not arrived at the point where drinking made him happy. He was talking, loudly, with the particular confidence of a man who had an audience and knew it. Beside him stood a girl. She was maybe 19, maybe a little younger. It was hard to tell because her face had the specific quality of someone who had spent years being careful not to be noticed, and careful not to take up space, and careful not to express anything that might be used against her. She was holding a small bag cloth worn the kind of bag that held everything a person owned when everything a person owned wasn't much. Her arms were at her sides. Her chin was slightly down. Her eyes were on the ground. She was standing still in the way that people stand still, when standing still is a survival strategy rather than a choice. The heavy-set man her father Elias understood from context, before anyone said it was talking about her the way you talked about livestock. "Strong," he was saying. "Never been sick a day. Good with animals. Good with a house." He paused. "Fair cook. Better than fair, actually, when there's something to cook with." A man at the edge of the crowd, well-dressed, thick through the shoulders, with the air of a man who owned things and was accustomed to acquiring more, looked at the girl with an expression that made Elias's stomach turn. "How old?" the well-dressed man said. 19 in March, the father said. "Any problems with her?" The father waved a hand. "Stubborn sometimes. Nothing a firm hand won't manage." The well-dressed man nodded slowly, like he was considering an investment. Elias stood at the edge of the crowd. He was aware of his own heartbeat in the particular way he became aware of it in the seconds before something happened that could not be unhappened. He told himself, "Not your business." He told himself, "You don't get involved." He told himself, "You know what happens when you try to fix things, Elias. You know exactly what happens." He looked at the girl. She had not moved, had not raised her eyes, had not flinched when the well-dressed man walked around her slowly, the way you walked around a horse you were considering purchasing. But her hands were clasped in front of her, and her knuckles were white. And that was the only thing on her entire body that told the truth about what was happening inside her. Elias pushed through the crowd. People moved for him without quite knowing why, something about the way he moved, maybe, or the size of him, or the quality of stillness he carried, that had always read to other people as something more dangerous than stillness. He came through the last row of observers and stopped. The father looked at him. The well-dressed man looked at him. The girl did not look at him. She was still looking at the ground. Elias looked at the girl. He did not look at her father. He did not look at the well-dressed man making calculations. He did not look at the crowd of 20 people who had decided observation was sufficient. He looked at the girl. "Did anyone ever ask you what you wanted?" he said. The silence was immediate. The father blinked. "What?" "Not you," Elias said, without looking at him. "Her." The girl's eyes came up. For the first time in however long she had been standing in the street with her bag and her white knuckles and her survival stillness, she looked directly at someone. She looked at Elias. Her eyes were gray, clear. The kind of clear that surprised you because you expected from everything else about her posture and her face, and the careful way she took up as little space as possible, that her eyes would be dim somehow. Used up. But they weren't. They were completely startlingly clear with something behind them that was not quite hope and not quite anger and not quite either, but was unmistakably alive. She did not answer him, but she kept looking at him, which was, Elias understood, an answer of its own kind. "Who are you?" the father demanded. "Elias Ward," he said. He finally looked at the man. "You're selling your daughter." "I'm making a business arrangement," the father said with the injured dignity of a man who resents having something named. "You're standing in the middle of Main Street offering her to the highest bidder," Elias said. "That's a sale." The well-dressed man Elias had placed him, now the name coming up from the one visit he'd made to Red Hollow 2 years back, was a man named Doyle. Gerald Doyle. He owned 3 properties in the valley and had a reputation that the people of Red Hollow had apparently decided to live with rather than address. "This is between Mercer and me," Doyle said. His voice was even. The voice of a man who was used to settling things with money and didn't see why this should be different. "How much?" Elias said. Doyle looked at him. "Excuse me. How much is he asking?" Mercer the father opened his mouth. $40, Doyle said smoothly, before Mercer could speak, cutting him off with the casual authority of a man who had already decided the transaction was his. Elias reached into his coat. He counted out $40 from the money he had brought to buy winter supplies and put it in Mercer's hand. The crowd was very quiet. Doyle's expression changed, slightly. Controlled, but changed. "That money was already spoken for," he said. "The money wasn't spoken for," Elias said. "He hadn't accepted it yet." He looked at Mercer. "Have you accepted it?" Mercer looked at the money in his hand. He was a man of limited complexity, and the complexity he did have was primarily organized around self-interest. He closed his hand around the $40. "Accepted," he said. Doyle looked at Elias with an expression that was not quite threat and not quite anything else, but was in the neighborhood of both. "You don't know what you're getting into," Doyle said. "I rarely do," Elias said. He picked up the girl's bag from where it sat at her feet. "Come on," he said to her. She stared at him. "I don't," she started. "I know," he said. "We'll talk about it away from here." She looked at her father. Mercer was already pocketing the money. He did not look at her. He had already moved on in the way of a man who has completed a transaction and has no further interest in the item. Something moved through the girl's face at that something she controlled very fast, the way she controlled everything. But Elias saw it. He saw the specific second when a person understands that a thing they have been telling themselves might not be true is in fact not true. She picked up her chin. She turned away from her father. She walked beside Elias toward his wagon. Behind them, Doyle said nothing. But Elias felt the quality of his silence, the way you felt weather changing, a pressure, a temperature, a promise. This was not over. He had known that before he reached into his coat. He had made the choice anyway. He was going to have to think about why. Later. At the wagon, the girl stopped. She looked at it, then at him. "Where are you taking me?" she said. Her voice was steadier than he'd expected. Low, careful. The voice of someone who has learned to make every word count because wasted words invited attention. "My ranch," he said. "In the foothills, about 2 hours north." "And then what?" she said. He looked at her. "And then nothing. You'll have a room, food, work if you want it." He paused. "That's all." She looked at him with those clear gray eyes, and he could see her running the calculation, the same calculation she had probably been running her entire life. Which was, what is this person getting out of this, and what is it going to cost me when they decide to collect? "Why?" she said. One word. Flat. Direct. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was asking for the actual reason. He thought about how to answer honestly. "Because Doyle was going to take you," he said. "And I've seen what happens to women who end up with men like Doyle." He looked at the wagon. "That's the reason." "That's it," she said. "That's it," he said. She looked at him for a long time. "My name is Clara," she said finally. "Clara Belle Mercer?" "Elias Ward," he said. She nodded. One small controlled nod. She climbed up onto the wagon seat without help. He climbed up beside her. He picked up the reins. "Mr. Ward," she said before he moved the horses. He looked at her. "If this is a trick," she said, "I want you to know that I will find a way to make you regret it." She said it without heat, without threat, with the calm specificity of a person stating a fact about a plan they have already made. He looked at her. "It's not a trick," he said. "Then drive," she said. He drove. The first hour of the ride was almost entirely silent. Elias had no objection to silence. He had constructed his entire life around it for 3 years. Silence was the medium he operated in by choice and by necessity, and he was not uncomfortable with the specific silence of a person who has been through something and needs time to be through it. Clara sat beside him, with her bag in her lap, and her hands folded over it, and her eyes on the road ahead. She was not relaxed. He could see that. She was sitting with the particular uprightness of someone who has not yet determined whether they are safe and is keeping themselves ready just in case. He did not try to fill the silence. He drove. About 40 minutes out of Red Hollow, she said, "You paid $40. "I did," he said. "That's your winter supplies money," she said. He glanced at her. "How do you know that?" "You had a list in your pocket when you came through the crowd," she said. "You put your hand in your coat to get the money, and I saw the edge of the list when you opened it." She paused. "Supply list. Not enough left for more than flour and salt after $40. He looked at the road. "We'll manage," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't ask you to do that." "I know. I didn't ask anyone to do anything," she said. There was something under the words, not accusation, not gratitude, something more complicated than either. "I've learned not to ask." "That's a hard thing to learn," he said. She said nothing. He drove. After another few minutes, she said, "What do you want from me?" He had been expecting the question. It was the right question, the only question really from her position. He had thought about how to answer it honestly. "Work," he said. "If you're willing. The ranch is one person's operation right now, and it's too much for one person. I've been managing, but only barely." He paused. "Cooking, keeping the house, helping with the animals in winter. That's what I'd ask for." "In exchange for what?" "Room," he said. "Board, safety." He paused. "And your own decisions." She turned to look at him. "My own decisions. About everything that isn't the ranch work," he said. What you eat when you sleep, whether you stay or go. He met her eyes briefly. You can leave any time you want. I'll help you get where you're going. She held his gaze. Men say things, she said. I know they do, he said. And then the things they say turn out to mean something different than the words, she said. I know that too, he said. So why should I believe you're different? He was quiet for a moment. You shouldn't, he said. Not yet. You don't know me. Trusting me on the basis of $40 and one kind sentence would be its own kind of foolishness, and you don't strike me as a fool. He looked at the road. Watch what I do. That's the only reliable test. She was quiet. Then, that's a more honest answer than I expected. I try to be honest, he said. Most people who say that aren't, she said. I know, he said. So watch what I do. She turned back to the road. He drove. The ranch appeared in the late afternoon. The small house, the barn, the fencing that needed work, the 40 acres of foothills land that Elias had been working alone for 3 years, and keeping functional only in the narrowest sense of the word. Clara looked at it. He watched her look at it, watched her make the same comprehensive inventory she had made of everything else since he'd met her, the quick systematic assessment of a person who has learned to understand their surroundings immediately because their surroundings are where the danger usually came from. It's small, she said. It is, he agreed. The east fence needs repair. He looked at the east fence. It does. The barn roof has a soft spot on the left side, she said. It'll go before winter if it's not reinforced. He looked at the barn roof. She was right. He had been meaning to address it for 2 months. I know, he said. She was quiet for a moment. You've been alone here a while. 3 years, he said. It shows, she said. Not unkindly, just accurately. He tied the horses and climbed down, and she climbed down herself without waiting, which he noted and filed away. She stood in the yard with her bag and looked at the house. Can I see the room? She said. Yes, he said. He showed her. It was the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. His own was barely larger. He had not had a guest in 3 years, and the room showed it a bed frame with a clean enough mattress, a washstand, a window that faced east. Nothing on the walls. Nothing that made it look like anyone had ever lived in it or expected to. Clara stood in the doorway and looked at the room. He waited for her to say something about it being inadequate. Does the window latch? She said. Yes, he said. From inside. Yes, he said. She nodded. She walked into the room and went to the window and checked the latch herself. Then she turned around. All right, she said. All right, he said. I'll stay for now, she said. And see what you do. He nodded. There's food in the kitchen, he said. Not much. I was supposed to get supplies today. I'll see what there is, she said. He left her to it. He went to the barn and stood with his horses for a while, in the particular quiet of an animal space that had always been easier for him than people space. And he thought about what he had done today. He had spent $40 he needed for winter supplies on a girl he didn't know. He had brought her to his ranch. He had told her she could leave whenever she wanted. He had looked at her white knuckles and her clear gray eyes and the way she checked the window latch from the inside, and he had felt something he had been specifically trying not to feel for 3 years. Not attraction, not yet, not simply. Something more basic than that. Recognition. He had seen in the posture of a girl being sold like property in the middle of a Montana street something he understood. Not the specific experience, but the thing underneath it. The specific shape of a person who has decided they are what other people say they are and has stopped fighting the definition and is carrying on because carrying on is all that's left. He knew that shape. He had been wearing it for 3 years. He fed the horses. He went back to the house. The smell reached him before he opened the door. Something warm and actual. not the cold storage smell the house had developed from one person living in it minimally. Clara had found the dried beans and the last of the smoked meat and a few things he had in the back of the pantry that he'd forgotten were there, and she had made something from them. She was at the stove. She did not look up when he came in. "Sit down," she said. "It'll be ready in a few minutes." He sat. She brought the food to the table. 2 bowls, 2 spoons. She sat across from him. He looked at the second bowl, the second spoon. The deliberate setting of 2 places at the table, which she had done in a kitchen she had been in for 45 minutes. "Thank you," he said. She picked up her spoon. "I told you I could cook," she said. They ate. The food was good, significantly better than what he made for himself, which said something since what he made for himself was the minimum required to stay functional. "You weren't lying about the cooking," he said. "I don't lie," she said. "I've found it makes everything more complicated." He looked at her. "Most people find it makes things easier in the short term," he said. "In the short term," she agreed. "And then you have to remember what you said, and keep saying the same thing, and eventually something doesn't match." She shook her head. "Too much work." He almost smiled. She caught it and looked at him with those clear eyes and said, "What? Whoa, nothing," he said. "Just, I had the same conclusion about lying, from a different direction." She looked at him steadily. "What direction?" He looked at his bowl. "War," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "How long were you in?" she said. 4 years?" he said. She absorbed that. "And then you came here." "And then I came here," he said, "and built this." He looked at the room, the minimal, functional, deliberately empty room of a man who had decided he didn't deserve more than the minimum. "It's not much." "It's something," she said. "Something is more than nothing." He looked at her. She was eating with the focused attention of someone who has not always had enough food and has learned not to take it for granted. She did not look up. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "The $40, he said. "I want to be clear about something." She waited. "You're not here because I bought you," he said. "What happened in town today, I paid money to prevent a worse thing from happening. That money doesn't give me anything. Not any claim on you, not any right to anything." He held her gaze. "You're here because you chose to come, and you'll leave when you choose to leave. And between those 2 things, nothing I paid changes what you are." She looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was doing the complicated calculation again. "And what am I?" she said. "Careful. Testing." "A person," he said simply. "Same as anyone." She looked at him. She was quiet for a long time. Then she put her spoon down and looked at him with those clear gray eyes that were not used up, not dimmed, not anything like what her life should have made them. And she said, "No one has ever said that to me before." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. "That doesn't make it less true." She picked up her spoon. She went back to eating, but something had changed in the way she was sitting. Something small, almost imperceptible. The deliberate compactness had shifted a degree. Not relaxed, not yet, but less braced than before. He ate his food and said nothing else. The wind came up outside the particular Montana wind that was already talking about winter, and the small house held against it, and the lamp was lit on the table, and 2 people who had both arrived at their particular disasters by different roads sat across from each other in a kitchen at the edge of the Montana foothills and ate a meal that was better than either of them had expected. That was the first evening. He washed the dishes. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him wash the dishes with an expression of someone witnessing something they did not have a category for. "You don't have to do that," she said. "Someone has to," he said. "I would have done them," she said. "I know," he said. "But you cooked. It's not complicated." She looked at him. He dried the last bowl and put it on the shelf and turned around. "Get some sleep," he said. "The work starts early here." "All right," she said. She went down the hall. He heard the door close. He heard the window latch click from the inside. He sat down at the kitchen table and put his hands flat on the wood and looked at the lamp. He had not planned any of this. He had planned flour and salt and ammunition, and to be back on the mountain road before noon. Instead, he had an empty pantry and $40 less, and a girl in the second bedroom who locked her window from the inside and had eyes that were not used up and made better food from nothing than he made from something, and had said, "No one has ever said that to me before," with the specific steadiness of a person saying a fact rather than asking for pity. He sat at the table for a while. He thought about Doyle. Doyle had let them go today. But Doyle was not a man who let things go. He was a man who waited and planned and came back from a better angle when he was ready. He would be back. Elias had known that the moment he counted out the $40. He had chosen it anyway. He sat at the table. He thought about the question he had asked in the middle of the crowd in Red Hollow. Did anyone ever ask you what you wanted? He thought about why he had asked it. He thought about the war and the things he had not been able to prevent, and the specific geography of guilt that had driven him to a 40-acre ranch in the Montana foothills where he could punish himself quietly and at length. He thought about a girl with white knuckles and clear gray eyes who checked the window latch from the inside. He thought, you are going to have to figure out what kind of man you are, Elias, because she is watching. And she has spent her whole life learning to read men correctly. And whatever you are, whatever you actually are, underneath the guilt and the solitude and the 3 years of minimum viable existence, she is going to see it. He blew out the lamp. He went to bed. In the room at the end of the hall, he heard nothing, which meant she was either asleep or awake and still. And both were things he understood. He lay in the dark and listened to the Montana wind and thought about 40. Clara woke before sunrise on the first morning. Not because anyone told her to, not because a sound startled her. She woke because her body had been trained over years of living in a house where being asleep when she was needed was a punishable offense to surface from sleep the moment the dark began to thin. She lay in the bed for a moment and listened. The house was quiet. Real quiet, not the held breath quiet of a place where someone was awake and waiting, but the actual quiet of a house with one other person in it who was still asleep. She could hear the wind outside. She could hear the horses shifting in the barn. She could hear from somewhere in the walls the small sounds a structure makes when the temperature changes and the wood adjusts. She could not hear Elias. She got up. She checked the window latch, still secured from the inside. She did this before she did anything else the same way she had done it before she fell asleep. Not because she expected it to have changed, but because verification was different from assumption, and she had learned never to assume. She dressed. She went to the kitchen. The pantry was nearly empty. She had used most of what was there for last night's meal, and what remained wouldn't make much. She found cornmeal. She found dried apples that had been there long enough to be very dry, but were still usable. She found coffee. She made coffee first. She was halfway through the cornmeal when Elias appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was dressed. He looked at the stove, then at her, then at the coffee. "You didn't have to start without me," he said. "I woke early," she said. Standing in the kitchen not cooking seemed wasteful. He went to pour himself coffee and stopped when he found the cup already poured and sitting at his place at the table. He looked at it, then at her. "I heard you come out," she said, without looking up from the cornmeal. "It takes about 4 minutes to pour and cool enough to drink." He sat down. He drank his coffee. She put food on the table and sat across from him, and they ate in the early dark the way they had eaten the night before. Not uncomfortably, not with the specific strain of two people trying to make conversation. They don't mean, but in the functional quiet of people who are sharing a space and have not yet determined the full terms of that sharing. After a while he said, "We need supplies. I'll go to Red Hollow today." She looked up. "I'll come," she said. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll come anyway." He looked at her steadily. She had noticed a man who looked at things steadily, not staring, Not pressuring, just genuinely paying attention in a way that most people didn't. "Doyle may be in town," he said. "I know," she said. "That doesn't concern you." She set down her fork. "Mr. Ward, I have been concerned about Gerald Doyle and men like Gerald Doyle for most of my life. Staying on this ranch today because he might be in town would be the same thing I've been doing for years, which is arranging my life around other people's threats." She held his gaze. "I'd rather stop doing that." Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee. "We leave in an hour," he said. She nodded. She cleared the table. He went to prepare the wagon. Red Hollow looked different the second time. Or maybe Clara looked at it differently. She was not standing in the middle of the street with a bag and white knuckles and a father who was talking about her teeth. She was sitting on the wagon seat beside a man who drove with the quiet competence of someone who knew where he was going and was not particularly concerned about who noticed. People noticed. She felt it, the specific quality of attention that a small town paid to things that had happened in it and were now present again. The way conversation near the general store shifted when Elias pulled up. The way a woman on the sidewalk looked at Clara with an expression that was half recognition and half something more complicated. Clara sat straight. She had decided sometime in the early morning hours while she was making cornmeal and thinking that she was going to sit straight. It was a small decision and a large one at the same time. It cost nothing, and it cost something. She sat straight. Elias climbed down and came around to her side, and she was already climbing down herself, and he stepped back to give her room without making anything of it, which she noted and filed. Inside the general store, the owner, a man named Tully, red-haired with the careful expression of someone who has learned to be neutral about most things, looked at them both and then focused professionally on Elias. "Ward," he said. "Tully," Elias said. He put the supply list on the counter. Tully looked at the list, then at Clara, then back at the list. "Heard about yesterday," Tully said carefully. "I imagine you did," Elias said. He didn't look up from the list. "Can you fill that?" "Most of it," Tully said. "Then fill most of it." Tully began pulling things from the shelves. Clara moved along the counter, looking at what was available, making her own mental inventory. Behind her, she heard the door open and the sound of someone else coming into the store. She turned. The woman was about 40, with the contained expression of someone who had spent years being careful. She looked at Clara and stopped. "You're the Mercer girl," she said, not accusingly, with a specific, careful recognition. "Clara Moore," Clara said. And then, because it was true, and she had decided to say true things, was Mercer. Not anymore. The woman looked at her for a moment. Then something in her face moved, subtle, almost invisible, the kind of shift that only showed if you were watching for it. "Good," the woman said quietly. She went to the counter and said nothing else. Clara turned back to the supplies. But she felt something she didn't have a word for yet. Something warm and small that was located somewhere in the chest and had to do with a stranger saying one word in that particular tone. Good. She didn't say anything about it. She helped carry the supplies to the wagon. They were almost finished loading when Doyle appeared. He came from across the street alone, which Clara noted immediately as a choice rather than a coincidence. A man coming alone to speak to them rather than arriving with support was a man sending a specific message, which was that he was willing to have a conversation. She was not sure whether that was better or worse than the alternative. Elias turned when she did. He had heard Doyle's footsteps before. She did. She saw him adjust before she'd even registered the sound, the particular alertness of a man who had spent years in situations where hearing things early was the difference. Doyle stopped at a distance that was conversational, but not close. "Ward," he said. "Doyle," Elias said. He went back to loading the wagon. Like Doyle was a weather event acknowledged noted not particularly alarming. Clara stayed where she was. Doyle looked at her. "Miss Mercer," he said. "Miss Ward," Clara said. It came out before she'd decided to say it. She was not sure where it came from, but once it was out, she held it, didn't flinch from it, didn't qualify, it just let it stand. Elias's hands stilled on the box he was loading. just for a second. Then he kept going. Doyle's expression adjusted. The small recalculation of a man who has walked into a situation that is slightly different than the one he'd mapped. "I wanted to talk about yesterday," he said. "So talk," Elias said. "What you paid for?" Doyle started. "Was settled," Elias said. "In front of 20 witnesses. Mercer accepted the money. The matter's done." "Mercer's a drunk who made a decision in public," Doyle said. "What he did with his own daughter." "She is not his daughter," Elias said. He set the last box in the wagon and turned to face Doyle fully. "Not in any way that matters. A man who puts a 19-year-old girl up in the middle of a street like a market animal isn't her father. He's something else." He held Doyle's gaze. "And the something else is done." Doyle was quiet for a moment. He looked at Clara again. The assessing look. Slower now. More careful. "You're comfortable with this," he said to her, like he was checking on her welfare, like he was concerned. Clara looked at him. She understood Gerald Doyle very clearly in this moment, the specific architecture of a man who used consideration as a strategy and concern as a tool, and had probably never once in his life asked a question because he actually wanted the answer. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you for your concern." Doyle smiled, the smile of a man acknowledging a move. "The offer I was making yesterday," he said to Elias, "still stands, if circumstances change." "They won't," Elias said. Doyle nodded. He put his hat back on. He looked at Clara one more time, and the look had something in it she didn't like. Patience mainly. The particular patience of a man who is not in a hurry because he believes time is on his side. He walked away. Clara and Elias stood at the wagon. "Miss Ward," Elias said quietly. She looked at him. His expression was unreadable, but not empty. He was doing the steady-looking thing. "I shouldn't have," she started. "No," he said. "You shouldn't worry about it." He climbed up onto the wagon seat. It was quick thinking. She climbed up beside him. They drove out of Red Hollow. About a mile out, she said, "He's not done." "No," Elias said. "He's going to find another angle." "Yes," Elias said. "What will you do?" Elias was quiet for a moment. "What I can," he said. "And make sure you can do what you can." He glanced at her. "Which is why I want to show you something when we get back." "What?" she said. "How to use a rifle," he said. She looked at him. "Every person on this property should know how to defend it," he said. "That includes you." She held his gaze. "All right," she said. He looked back at the road. They drove. The rifle lesson happened that afternoon. Elias took her to the east side of the property, away from the barn and the horses, and he showed her a Winchester that was clean and well kept in the way of a man who understood that a weapon being reliable was not optional. He showed her how to hold it without telling her she was doing it wrong first. He showed her the position and then adjusted from there. He explained the mechanism not as a list of instructions, but as a piece of logic. Here's what it does. Here's why. Here's what that means for what you do with it. She was a fast learner. She always had been. She had learned growing up that the faster you understood something, the less it was used against you. On the fourth shot, she hit what she was aiming at. Elias stood beside her and said nothing for a moment. Then, again. She shot again, hit it again. She lowered the rifle. "You've done this before," he said. "No," she said. "But I understand the logic of it." He looked at her. "The logic." "You're compensating for the weight pulling the barrel low," she said. "And the trigger pull is longer than you expect. Once you understand those two things, the aim is just geometry." He was quiet. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just deciding whether I should be more or less concerned about the things you might do with a rifle now that you understand the geometry." She looked at him. He looked back, and then something happened that neither of them had planned and both of them needed. Clara laughed. Not the polite, careful version of a laugh that she used when she needed to seem agreeable. A real laugh, sudden and brief and genuine, the kind that came out of somewhere unexpected. Elias did not laugh, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that was its own version of the same thing. She lowered the rifle. She looked at the target. "Thank you," she said, for the lesson she meant, but also for the way he'd said it, the dry, steady way that acknowledged her capability rather than being nervous about it. "Keep it in your room," he said. "The Winchester." She looked at him. "You mean that?" "I said it," he said. She held the rifle. She had held things that were supposed to make her feel safe before, and been wrong about them. This was different. Not because it was a weapon, because he was saying, "This is yours to use. This is yours to decide with. I am not protecting you by keeping you helpless." "All right," she said. They walked back to the ranch. The second week was different from the first. The first week, Clara had operated at the specific energy level of someone waiting for the other thing to happen. She'd worked harder than the situation required, probably because working hard was both her nature and her armor, but underneath all of it was the braced quality, the readiness for the moment when the actual terms of the arrangement would be revealed. The second week, she was still braced. She didn't think she knew how not to be. But the brace had moved slightly from the front of every moment to the back of it, which was a meaningful difference even if it wasn't a complete change. She noticed things about Elias. He never raised his voice. Not at the hands, there were no ranch hands, just the two of them, not at the animals, not at her. She had grown up in a house where voices rose frequently and without much predictability, and she had developed the specific, finely tuned alertness of someone who was always listening for the change in tone that meant something was about to get worse. That alertness was still in her. It simply had nothing to respond to here. He kept his word. Every small thing he had said he would do, he did. If he said he'd fix the east fence in the morning, it was fixed by noon. If he said there'd be coffee, there was coffee. These were small things, and she was aware they were small things, but small things were how you knew really, because anyone could keep a large promise when keeping it was visible. It was the small ones that told the truth. He did not watch her. This was the thing that surprised her most. She had expected from the first night to feel watched, the specific quality of male attention that said you are being assessed constantly, and the assessment is never quite finished. Elias did not do this. He was aware of her. She could tell that he was the kind of man who was aware of everything in his immediate surroundings as a matter of basic operation. But he was not watching her in that way. He noticed her the way he noticed the condition of the fence or the weather coming in from the north. Present, accurate, and not possessive. It was the strangest thing she had ever experienced from a man. She told herself not to trust it too completely yet. She watched what he did. On the 10th day, she found the box. She was cleaning the small room off the kitchen, a utility room, mostly storage, and she moved a stack of things from a shelf to get at the dust behind them, and a wooden box fell and opened on the floor. Letters, a photograph, and a small carved figure, the kind a man made with his hands when he was waiting for something. She put everything back in the box carefully. She put the box back on the shelf. That evening after supper, she said, "There's a box in the utility room. I wasn't looking for it. It fell." Elias looked up from the table. "It's fine," he said. "I didn't read the letters," she said. "I want you to know that." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. "You don't know?" she said. "You assumed." "No," he said. "I know. If you'd read them, you'd look different right now." She looked at him. "How would I look?" "Like you'd learned something about me that I hadn't chosen to tell you," he said. "You'd look like you were deciding what to do with it." He paused. "You look like yourself. So you didn't read them." Clara held his gaze. She had not been seen that clearly, and she could not remember when, actually. It was possible no one had ever done it. "Whose photograph?" she said, because she had seen it briefly and she wanted to understand. He was quiet for a moment. "My brother's," he said. He died in the war. She did not say, I'm sorry. She said, were you with him? No, Elias said. His voice stayed level. I was 2 miles away. Different engagement. He looked at the table. Close enough to hear it, not close enough to do anything. She looked at him, and she understood in the particular way she understood things. She had enough experience to recognize what he was carrying. Not the grief, though, that was there too, but the specific cargo of a person who had been present at something terrible and had survived it and was not sure they deserved to have survived it. She knew that feeling, not from war, from a life that had treated her as less than what she was, and the specific strange guilt of continuing to exist inside that. That's why you built the ranch here, she said. Far from everything. He looked at her. Partly, he said, because you thought you deserved to be alone. He held her gaze for a long time. You're very direct, he said. I learned that lying was more complicated, she said. We've had this conversation. We have, he said. He was quiet. Yes, he said finally. That's part of it. She nodded. She didn't push further. She had asked what she wanted to ask and gotten an honest answer, and pushing further would have been taking something he hadn't chosen to give. The carving in the box, she said. Did you make it? Yes, he said. Of what? A horse, he said. The one my brother had when we were boys. She looked at the table. It's good work, she said. The carving. He said nothing. You should do more of it, she said. He looked at her. Why? She considered how to say it. Because you made something from nothing for a reason that mattered to you, she said. That's a different kind of thing than building a fence or repairing a roof, both necessary, but different. She paused. You should have more of both kinds. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he got up and poured 2 cups of coffee and put one in front of her and sat back down. It was, she would think later, the closest thing to a thank you that Elias Ward was capable of in the second week of knowing someone. She accepted it. The twist came on a Thursday 3 weeks after she'd arrived. A writer came to the ranch in the afternoon, not Doyle, not her father, someone she didn't recognize. Young with the look of a hired messenger, and he asked for Elias by name. Elias went out. Clara watched from the kitchen window. The conversation was brief. The writer gave Elias an envelope and left. Elias came inside. He put the envelope on the table. What is it? Clara said. A legal document, he said. From Doyle's lawyer. She came to the table. She looked at the document. She could read her father had not thought this useful, but her mother had taught her before she died quietly, in the margins of other activities, the way women passed important things to daughters when they weren't supposed to. She read the document. It was a claim of property, specifically that Caleb Mercer had not had the legal standing to transfer the arrangement made regarding Clara to Elias Ward, because the original arrangement had been made with Doyle prior to the public transaction constituting a prior claim. She set the paper down. He's saying he had a prior claim, she said. That's what he's saying, Elias said. Does he? No, Elias said. There was no written agreement with Mercer. Doyle is claiming a verbal prior commitment. It's not nothing, but it's also not strong. He paused. He's not doing this because he thinks he'll win in court. He's doing it because the process is the point, Clara said. Elias looked at her. The legal filing is a public, she said. It puts my name in a document as property being contested. It makes the question of what I am, what my status is officially open. She looked at the paper. Even if he loses, he's established that I can be claimed, that there's a question about it. Elias was very still. Yes, he said. He's a patient man, she said. He is, Elias said. She looked at the document for a moment longer. Then she looked at Elias. Who's your lawyer? She said. I don't have one, he said. You need one, she said. Clara. You need one today, she said. Not because of the claim. Because you need to establish in writing with a lawyer's name on it that what happened in Red Hollow 3 weeks ago was a transaction that is complete and final, and has no prior complications. She held his gaze. Doyle is building a paper case. We need a paper answer. Elias looked at her. We, he said. She heard it. The same thing she had heard with Miss Ward in the street outside the general store, the word arriving before the decision had fully formed, carrying more than she'd technically authorized it to carry. Do you have a problem with that? She said. He held her gaze. No, he said. They rode to the county seat the following morning. The lawyer's name was Aldridge. He was 60, methodical, and had the energy of a man who had seen most variations of human dispute and had organized his feelings about it into a functional neutrality. He listened to Elias explain the situation. He looked at the document from Doyle's lawyer. He looked at Clara. Miss, he started. Ward, Clara said, for the second time. Clara Ward. Aldridge looked at her. Then he looked at Elias. Elias looked at the wall. Miss Ward, Aldridge said, with the small adjustment of a man who has received information and incorporated it. Can you speak to the events of, and he named the date. Clara spoke. She told him everything directly in the order it happened without embellishment or omission. She told him about the street and the crowd and the $40 and the wagon. She told him what was said and what wasn't said. She told him what Elias had told her about the terms of the arrangement, and she told him she had agreed to them. Aldridge listened. When she was done, he said, You are 19 years old. Yes, she said. Mercer is your father. He is, she said. And you are stating that the transaction in Red Hollow on that date was entered into with full knowledge and consent on your part. Doyle was about to take her, Elias said. Mr. Ward? Aldridge said mildly, I am asking Miss Ward. Clara looked at Aldridge directly. I am stating that Gerald Doyle intended to take me that morning by whatever means were available to him. I am stating that Elias Ward paid the money that prevented that from happening. And I am stating that I chose to come to this ranch, and I am choosing to remain here. She held the lawyer's gaze. If Doyle's claim is based on a prior arrangement with my father, I would like to know whether my father had any legal right to make such an arrangement with anyone at any time, given that I am a person and not property. The room was quiet. Aldridge looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, That is an interesting question. Yes, Clara said. I thought so. Aldridge looked at Elias. I'll need 3 days to research the relevant statutes, he said. And I will need a retainer. How much? Elias said. Aldridge named a number. Elias paid it from what remained of his winter supplies money. They rode back to the ranch. About halfway home, Elias said, That question you asked him. Which one? Clara said. Whether your father had the legal right to make an arrangement with anyone, given that you are a person and not property. Yes, Clara said. Did you know the answer? I know what the answer should be, she said. I wanted to hear what a lawyer would say about it. Elias was quiet. And if the law doesn't agree with what the answer should be, he said. Clara looked at the road ahead. Then we find another angle, she said. He glanced at her sideways. You think 3 moves ahead, he said. I think about consequences, she said. I've been watching them my whole life. He looked back at the road. They drove in quiet for a while. Then he said, When you said Miss Ward in the street, and again to Aldridge. She said nothing. I'm not asking you to account for it, he said. I'm asking... He paused. Are you... She understood what he was asking, not about the name itself, about what using it meant, whether she was testing it or meaning it or something in between. She thought about it honestly. I said it because it felt true, she said. Both times. She looked at the road. I don't entirely know what to do with that yet. He was quiet for a moment. Neither do I, he said. And that was the most honest thing either of them had said about the thing that was happening between them, and they both knew it, and neither of them said anything further, and the wagon moved north toward the ranch through the October cold, and the sky was enormous and clear above them, and they drove in the specific quiet of 2 people who have said something real and are now living inside the saying of it. The 3rd week came. Aldridge sent a letter. His research on the legal question Clara had raised had uncovered something unexpected. A statute recently passed in the territory that, while not addressing the specific situation directly, contained language that could be argued to restrict a parent's legal ability to enter into binding agreements on behalf of an adult child without that child's documented consent. Doyle's claim, it turned out, was weak from multiple directions. Elias read the letter at the kitchen table. He looked at Clara. "He's going to have a harder time than he thought," he said. "Good," she said. She was working on the ranch accounts. He had asked her in the second week if she'd be willing to manage them, and she had said yes, and had proceeded to reorganize 3 months of records into a system that actually made sense. "That means he'll try something else." "You're sure he'll keep trying?" Elias said. "Men like Doyle don't stop because the first approach failed," she said. "They stop because continuing costs more than stopping." She looked up from the accounts. "We haven't made it cost enough yet." He looked at her. "What does it take to make it cost enough?" he said. "The ranch needs to be clearly and visibly something that he can't take by waiting," she said. "Legal standing, community standing, both." She set down her pen. "Doyle is betting that this is temporary, that you'll get tired of the complications or I'll leave." Making it solid turned out to mean different things on different days. Some days it meant accounts Clara at the kitchen table with the ledger, and a systematic precision that had by the end of the third week identified 2 suppliers who were overcharging, and 1 seasonal cost pattern that Elias had been absorbing as inevitable when it was actually preventable. She showed him each thing as she found it, not as a demonstration of competence, but as information he needed, and he took each piece the same way directly, without defensiveness, incorporating it and moving. Some days it meant the fence. Elias had been repairing the east line in sections, and Clara had started helping, not because he'd asked, but because the work went twice as fast with 2 people, and she had decided that time mattered. She was not strong the way he was strong, but she was precise, and she learned the angles of the work quickly, and they developed a rhythm that covered ground without requiring much conversation. Some days it meant the horse. The gray mare in the barn had been Elias's second animal practical steady, the kind of horse a man chose when he needed reliability rather than speed. Clara had been learning to ride on her in the second week in the field behind the barn in the specific, incremental way Elias taught things. Here is the logic of it. Here is what the animal needs from you. The rest follows from those 2 things. By the 4th week, Clara was riding properly. By the 5th, she was riding fast. Elias watched her come back from the north field one afternoon and said nothing for a moment. Then, "You could outrun most of the men in Red Hollow on that horse." "Good," Clara said. She slid down and patted the mare's neck. "That's the point, isn't it?" He looked at her. "You're teaching me to leave," she said, not accusingly, clearly. "If I need to." "I'm teaching you to choose," he said. "Leaving is one of the choices." She held the mare's reins and looked at him. "What are the others?" she said. He met her gaze steadily. "That's up to you," he said. "That's the whole point." She held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she took the mare to the barn. The lawyer Aldridge came to the ranch on a Tuesday in the 5th week, which Clara had not expected, and which told her from the moment she saw him arrive that whatever he was bringing was either too complicated to send in a letter or too important to risk in transit. She brought him coffee without being asked. He sat at the kitchen table with his briefcase and his organized expression and said, "Doyle has shifted his approach." Elias sat across from him. Clara sat at the end of the table, which was neither beside Elias nor across from the lawyer, but at the point where she could see both. She had chosen this position deliberately, and Aldridge had noticed, she could tell, and had recalibrated something in his assessment of the situation. "How?" Elias said. "He's withdrawn the prior claim," Aldridge said. "The legal filing is gone." Clara said, "That's not good news." Both men looked at her. "He withdrew it because it wasn't working," she said. "Not because he's done." A man like Doyle doesn't spend money on a lawyer and then give up. He withdraws when he's found something better. She looked at Aldridge. What's the better thing? Aldridge opened his briefcase. He's filed a separate action, he said, against Caleb Mercer. My father, Clara said, claiming that Mercer owes him money for a prior verbal agreement and that the debt was incurred specifically in relation to, Aldridge paused, the arrangement that was subsequently transferred to Mr. Ward. Clara absorbed this. He's suing my father, she said, for the money my father was supposed to bring him. Yes, Aldridge said, which my father doesn't have, she said. No, Aldridge said, which means Doyle is going to own my father's debt, she said. And Doyle is going to use that debt to pressure my father into what exactly? Aldridge looked at the paper in front of him. Into signing a document that states the original arrangement was never properly transferred, that the transaction with Mr. Ward was invalid because Mercer was acting under duress. He looked up. Essentially, Doyle would have your father testify that he was coerced into accepting Mr. Ward's money, rather than completing the original agreement. Elias had been very still during this explanation. Mercer would do it, Clara said. She said it without emotion, just fact. He'd say whatever Doyle told him to say if it cleared his debt. Probably, Aldridge said. Clara looked at the table. She had not thought about her father much in the past 5 weeks. She had been, she realized, engaged in the specific human capacity to focus on what was directly in front of you and leave what was behind you in the behind. The ranch and the accounts and the fence and the rifle and the horse and the particular daily geography of building a life had occupied the space where thinking about Caleb Mercer would otherwise have lived. She thought about him now. A man who had sold his daughter for gambling money and taken the $40 without once looking at her face, and had probably by now drunk most of it, and remembered the day as something that had happened to him rather than something he had done. How much does he owe Doyle? Clara said. Aldridge named the amount. It was not a large amount. It was the specific, humiliating smallness of it. The amount of money her father had valued her at roughly before settling for less, that landed in her chest and sat there. Can we pay it? She said, to Elias. Elias looked at her. That's not, he started. Can we pay it? She said again, steady. He looked at Aldridge. Aldridge named the amount again. Elias was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. Then pay it, Clara said. Pay Doyle what my father owes him. Remove the debt. She held Elias's gaze. If Doyle doesn't own my father's debt, he doesn't own my father's testimony. Aldridge looked at her. That's a sound strategy, he said, with the particular tone of a man who had not expected to hear a sound strategy from the direction it was coming from. I know, Clara said. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Aldridge. Draw up the payment documents, he said. We'll settle it this week. They settled it by Thursday. Doyle received the payment for Mercer's debt through Aldridge's office and had no legal grounds to refuse it. The debt was cleared. Mercer had nothing left to testify to. Doyle sent no response. His silence was in Clara's assessment more concerning than any communication would have been. She told Elias this on Thursday evening. I know, he said. He's going to try something that doesn't involve lawyers, she said. I know, he said again. Are you worried? She said. He looked at her. I've been in situations that were more dangerous than Gerald Doyle, he said. That doesn't answer the question, she said. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. I'm worried, but not about Doyle specifically. He paused. I'm worried about not being where I need to be when something happens. She understood what he meant. The ranch was large enough that one person couldn't watch all of it. If Doyle chose a moment and a location carefully, there would be a gap. Then we close the gaps, she said. They spent the following week mapping the property not formally, but in the functional way of two people walking boundaries and identifying the places where someone approaching would be visible early and the places where they wouldn't. Clara's clear, systematic mind was good at this kind of mapping. Elias's years of military training gave him a different vocabulary for the same information, and between those two vocabularies, they built a comprehensive picture of where they were vulnerable and what could be done about each vulnerability. She did not think of it as preparing for an attack. She thought of it as understanding what she had, because that was what it had become, not his ranch with her in it. Something both of theirs in a proportion she couldn't fully name yet, but could feel the shape of. The first snow came in November. Montana winter arrived the way most large things arrived. Not suddenly, but with an accumulation that made it seem sudden when the full weight of it finally settled. The first morning, Clara woke to snow. She stood in the kitchen and looked at it through the window and felt something she needed a moment to identify. Peace, not the absence of threat. The threat was still there. Doyle was still there. Her father was still out there in Red Hollow, spending money he didn't have on things that wouldn't help him. All of that was still true, but she was standing in a warm kitchen in a house where she knew where the rifle was and how to use it, and the horse in the barn could carry her faster than pursuit, and the accounts were in order, and the fence was repaired. And the man who slept at the other end of the house kept his word about everything, and had never once looked at her the way Gerald Doyle had looked at her. She was standing in peace inside a situation that had not become peaceful. That was different from anything she had experienced before. She made coffee. Elias came in from checking the animals. "First snow," he said. "Yes," she said. He poured coffee and sat down, and she sat across from him, and they were quiet for a while, in the specific comfortable quiet that had developed between them. Not the absence of things to say, but the presence of enough ease that silence didn't require filling. "Elias," she said. He looked up. "Tell me about your brother," she said. He was still for a moment. She held his gaze. "You don't have to," she said. "But I'd like to know, if you're willing." He looked at the coffee cup. "His name was Daniel," he said. "He was 2 years younger." He paused. "He was better than me at most things that mattered. Better with people. Better at finding something worth laughing about in a given situation." He looked at the window. "He shouldn't have been in the war. He enlisted because I did, because he couldn't let me go without going too." Clara said nothing. She let the silence do what silence could do when it was the right kind. When he died, Elias said, "I decided I had used up my right to want things." He said it flatly, not fishing for contradiction, just naming a fact about his own internal geography. The ranch was, "I built it out here because it felt like the appropriate size. Small, isolated, just enough to survive on." He looked at her. "I wasn't building something. I was serving a sentence." "I know," Clara said. He looked at her. "I could see it in the house the first day," she said. "Not in the building you built it well, but in the way you were living in it. The minimum. The single place at the table." She paused. "I know what it looks like when someone has decided they don't deserve more than the minimum." He held her gaze. "You've decided the same thing about yourself," he said. "I've been told it long enough that the decision made itself," she said. "But I'm undeciding it." She picked up her coffee. "You should consider doing the same." He was quiet for a long moment. "You're more direct than anyone I've met," he said. "I told you," she said. "Lying is more work." "This isn't lying," he said. "This is—" He stopped. "What?" she said. He shook his head once, not dismissively. The specific headshake of a man who has arrived at an edge of something and is deciding whether to step off it. "Clara," he said. "Yes," she said. He met her eyes. "I'm glad you came," he said. Simple, direct, no qualification. She held his gaze. "I'm glad I got off the wagon," she said. He almost smiled. The real version was closer than the almost version was getting, and she had started tracking that distance because it told her things about how the 5 weeks had moved. They finished their coffee. The snow kept coming. The twist came from a direction neither of them had been watching. It came in the form of a woman. She appeared at the ranch on a Wednesday morning in the second week of December, on a horse that had been ridden hard with the particular look of someone who had made a decision urgently and traveled on that urgency before it could cool. She was about 35, brown hair, wind-burned face, and an expression that was familiar to Clara in a way that took her a moment to identify, and then she identified it because she had seen it in her own face in the water bucket reflection on bad mornings. The expression of someone who has been surviving rather than living and has reached the end of their capacity to distinguish between the two. Her name was Ruth Hadley. Clara brought her inside. Elias came in from the barn and stopped in the kitchen doorway at the sight of a stranger at his table. "Who?" he started. "Her name is Ruth," Clara said. She was already at the stove. "She's come from Doyle's property." Elias went very still. He looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at him with the specific measuring expression of a person who has done something frightening on the premise that it was the right thing to do and is now checking whether that premise was correct. "You're Ward," she said. "Yes," he said. Acquired money she didn't have, and courage she had been running low on. What she was telling them now, she said, had taken 3 weeks to decide to tell. Doyle had a second legal approach in preparation, not against Mercer, not against Clara directly, against Elias. "He's found someone to say that the money paid to Mercer was fraudulent," Ruth said. "That there was an existing contract, not just verbal, written between Doyle and Mercer, signed 2 weeks before the transaction in the street." Clara and Elias looked at each other. "A forged document," Clara said. "I don't know who made it," Ruth said, "but I've seen it. Doyle showed his lawyer. It's dated 2 weeks before." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "If that document is accepted, the transaction in the street is void. Mr. Ward committed—" She hesitated. "Fraud," Elias said. "And theft of contracted property," Ruth said quietly. "Those are criminal charges." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara set down the coffee pot. She looked at Elias. He was doing the steady-looking thing at the table, at the situation, running the calculation. She could see him running it. "The document is forged," she said. "Yes," Ruth said. "But I don't know how to prove that." "When did you see it?" Clara said. 2 weeks ago, when Doyle met with the lawyer." Was anyone else present? Ruth thought. Doyle's man Cotter. He was in the room. Cotter, Elias said. He said it with the specific tone of someone retrieving a name from a context. "You know him," Clara said. "I know of him," Elias said. "He worked the Pemberton Ranch before Doyle. And before that," he paused. "Before that, he was in Red Hollow when there were questions about a land title." Clara looked at him. Questions about a forged land title. Questions that were never resolved, Elias said. Because the man questioning them stopped doing so. "Because Doyle owns a lot of things in this territory," Clara said, "including people who could make questions stop." Ruth looked between them. "You understand what I'm telling you," she said. "What this means for you." "We understand," Clara said. "Thank you." She held Ruth's gaze. "What did it cost you to come here?" Ruth looked at the table. "I left," she said. "I'm not going back." Clara looked at the woman across the table, the wind-burned face and the specific expression, and the horse that had been ridden hard on urgency before it could cool, and felt something move through her. Not quite recognition. Closer to continuation. The same story in a different body at a different stage. "You'll stay here," Clara said. Ruth looked at her. "I don't want to cause more trouble." "You'll stay here," Clara said again. To Elias, "She'll stay here." Elias looked at Clara, then at Ruth. "There's a room," he said, simply. Ruth blinked. The blink of someone who had prepared for more difficulty than this. "Thank you," she said. Clara nodded. She got up and began making something for Ruth to eat, and while she was at the stove, she thought about the forged document and Cotter and Doyle's patience and the criminal charges that were being quietly assembled in a lawyer's office in Red Hollow. She thought about it very clearly and very fast. She turned around. "Aldridge," she said to Elias. "Tomorrow morning," he said. He had been thinking the same thing. "Tonight," she said. "Send a rider tonight. We need him to know before Doyle's lawyer files anything." He looked at her. "If the filing happens first," she said, "we're responding. If we move first, we're establishing the context before his version exists." He stood up. "I'll ride myself," he said. "Faster than finding someone." "Be careful," she said. He looked at her. The look lasted 1 second longer than information transfer required. "Always," he said. He went to saddle the horse. Clara fed Ruth and showed her the room and came back to the kitchen and sat at the table alone and thought about forged documents and criminal charges and a man who had been building a case for 2 months with the patience of someone who believed he always won eventually. She thought about winning. Not in the abstract, specifically, what it would take. She got out the ranch accounts and the legal correspondence and the notes she'd been keeping since Aldridge's first visit, and she spread them on the table and she began working. She worked until Elias came back at midnight. He came in and found her at the table and looked at what she had in front of her. "Aldridge will be here tomorrow afternoon," he said. "Good," she said. "Look at this." He sat down. She had assembled from what Ruth had told them and what she already knew from the accounts and the legal correspondence, a sequence of events that showed Doyle's approach not as 3 separate legal actions, but as one coordinated strategy. The prior claim, the debt purchase, the forged document, they were not 3 attempts. They were 1 attempt in 3 stages, each designed to fail in a visible way, while the next stage was prepared. "He's been planning this since the day in the street," Clara said. "Maybe before. Maybe he and Mercer had something already arranged before that day." Elias looked at the sequence she had laid out. "If Mercer and Doyle had a prior arrangement," he said slowly, "it wasn't a public transfer with witnesses designed to look spontaneous while actually being the final step in something already arranged." Clara looked at Elias across the table. "Which means the $40 you paid wasn't interrupting a transaction. It was interrupting a plan." Elias sat with that for a moment. "And if there was a prior written agreement between Mercer and Doyle," he said slowly, "then Doyle has been holding that document for months, waiting for the right moment to use it." "Or he had it made after the fact and backdated it," Clara said. "Which is what Ruth saw. The question is which." "Does it matter?" Elias said. "It matters for Cotter," Clara said. "If the document is genuinely old, Cotter witnessed a real signing and his testimony confirms the date. If it was made recently and backdated, Cotter witnessed the forgery." She looked at the sequence on the table. "A man who witnessed a forgery is in a different position than a man who witnessed a real document. One is a loyal employee, the other is a criminal accomplice." Elias looked at her. "You're saying Cotter might not be as committed to Doyle's version as Doyle thinks," he said. "I'm saying Cotter may not have fully understood what he was being asked to witness," Clara said. "And that a man who realizes he's been made a criminal accomplice without his full knowledge might be willing to talk to the right person." "Aldridge," Elias said. "Aldridge," Clara confirmed. They worked until 2 in the morning. When Clara finally put down her pen, Elias looked at what she had assembled, the sequence, the connections, the specific vulnerability in Doyle's approach that hinged on Cotter's willingness to maintain a version of events that implicated him as much as anyone, and said nothing for a moment. "Then, how did you learn to think like this?" Clara looked at the table. "I spent 19 years watching a man mismanage everything he touched," she said. "You learn the shape of bad decisions very well when you live inside the consequences of them." She paused. "And I learned that the people who do what Doyle does always have one thing in common." "What?" Elias said. "They believe they're the only person in the room who's thinking clearly," she said. "They make their plans as if everyone else is just reacting, as if the people they're working against aren't also thinking." Elias looked at her steadily. "Doyle has been planning against a 19-year-old girl and a solitary rancher," Clara said. He hasn't been planning against what we actually are. What are we actually? Elias said. Quiet. Not rhetorical. She held his gaze. People who think 3 moves ahead, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. She went to bed. She lay in the dark with the window latch checked and the rifle at the bedside, and she thought about Doyle and Cotter, and the forged document, and the criminal charges being assembled in a lawyer's office in Red Hollow. She thought about this morning in Denver. No, not Denver, in Red Hollow, in the street with the bag and the white knuckles. She thought about standing still because standing still was what you did when moving made it worse. She was not standing still anymore. She went to sleep. Aldridge arrived the following afternoon as promised, and Clara and Elias sat with him at the kitchen table for 3 hours. Ruth sat at the end of the table, the same position Clara always took, and answered questions when asked with the careful precision of someone who had been storing information for 2 years without knowing when it would be needed. Aldridge listened to everything. He made notes. When they finished, he sat back and looked at what he had. The Cotter angle is viable, he said. If he was present at the creation of a fraudulent document, he is a party to fraud, whether or not he fully understood that at the time. The threat of that position being made explicit to him, not a threat of prosecution, just a clear statement of legal reality, may be sufficient to produce a different account of events. Can you approach him? Elias said. Not directly, Aldridge said. Not without risking that Doyle finds out and the document disappears. He paused. I'd need someone Cotter trusts enough to speak to honestly. Ruth looked up from the end of the table. Everyone looked at her. I know Cotter, she said. Careful. Thinking. We worked on the same property for 2 years. He's not... She paused. He's not a bad man. He does what Doyle tells him because Doyle is the kind of person it's easier to obey than to refuse. She looked at her hands. But he has a daughter, in Billings. He sends her money every month. He talks about her. A man with a daughter he sends money to, Clara said, is a man who thinks about what kind of man he's being. Ruth looked at her. Yes, she said. Can you write to him? Clara said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Not a letter. If Doyle sees a letter from me... Not through the post, Clara said. Through someone in Red Hollow who would carry a message without making it a production. She looked at Elias. Tully. Elias said immediately. At the general store. He's not in Doyle's pocket. Aldridge made a note. I want to be clear, he said, looking at the table, about what we're attempting here. If Cotter confirms that the document was recently created and backdated Doyle's criminal filing against Mr. Ward, collapses. More than collapses, it reverses. A fabricated document submitted to support a criminal charge is itself a serious crime. He looked up. We would not simply be defending against Doyle. We would be building a case against him. The room was quiet. Clara looked at Elias. He was doing the steady calculation. She had learned to read it the particular quality of his stillness when he was running all the implications of something before he committed to it. Do it, he said. Aldridge nodded. He closed his case. One more thing, Clara said. Aldridge looked at her. My father, she said. Where is he in all of this? Aldridge considered. Mercer is a potential witness for Doyle in the original transaction dispute, but since that debt was cleared, he has no financial incentive to cooperate. He paused. He's also a liability for Doyle, because if Mercer is questioned about the timeline of the original arrangement, his answers may not be consistent with Doyle's version. Meaning my father might accidentally tell the truth, Clara said. Caleb Mercer, Aldridge said carefully, is the kind of witness who tells the version of truth that is most convenient for himself in the immediate moment. That's not always Doyle's truth. Clara nodded. Don't approach him, she said. Let him be where he is. Agreed, Aldridge said. He left. Clara and Elias and Ruth sat at the kitchen table after he'd gone. Ruth said, If this works... When this works, Clara said. Ruth looked at her. Something moved through her expression. Something that was partly the same thing Clara had felt when Vera in the general store said good in that particular tone. The specific sensation of being in the presence of someone who expected the right outcome rather than hoping for it. When this works, Ruth said, what happens to Doyle? He faces charges, Elias said. Document fraud, abuse of legal process. He paused. At minimum. He has a lot of money, Ruth said, and a lot of people who owe him things. So does every man who's used those tools long enough, Clara said. But the tools only work if the people around you believe you're untouchable. The moment the evidence is in front of a court. She paused. Money can't change what a document says about when it was made. Ruth was quiet. I've been afraid of him for 2 years, she said. I know, Clara said. You don't have to be afraid of him here. She meant it the way she meant everything, simply without ornament. As a fact rather than a reassurance. Ruth nodded. She went to her room. Clara began clearing the table. Clara, Elias said. She looked up. He was sitting at the table and looking at her with the specific expression she had filed under something. I don't have a word for yet. The one that was not the almost smile and not the steady calculation look, but something more personal than either. What, she said. Nothing, he said. You were going to say something, she said. I was, he said. Then say it, she said. He looked at the table briefly, then back at her. I want to say something that I'm not sure I have the right to say yet, he said. She set down what she was holding. She gave him her full attention, which she had learned he required before he would say the things that mattered, because he didn't say important things towards someone who was partly elsewhere. Say it anyway, she said, and we'll figure out the right part after. He held her gaze. I don't know when it happened exactly, he said, but at some point in the last 6 weeks, this stopped being me trying to do the right thing by someone who needed help. He paused, and became, I don't know the right word for it. What's the wrong word for it? She said. He almost smiled. Home, he said. Clara stood at the kitchen table and held that word. She had lived in a house her whole life that had never used that word accurately. She had understood home as a location, the place you were required to return to, the place that made the claims on you that you had no power to refuse. Not the warm thing, the obligatory thing. What Elias was describing was the warm thing. You're not sure you have the right to say that, she said. I'm not sure I've earned it, he said. She looked at him. You asked me one question in a street full of people who weren't asking any questions, she said. You paid $40 you needed for winter supplies. You gave me a room with a window that latched from the inside, and you showed me how to use a rifle, and you let me reorganize your accounts, and you trusted me with your brother's name. She held his gaze. You've been earning it every day. You just haven't been keeping the account. He looked at her. Home, she said, trying it. He was very still. Yes, she said, simply. Me too. They were quiet. The kitchen was warm, and outside the Montana December was doing what December did, and inside the house Ruth was in her room, and the accounts were on the table, and the Winchester was in Clara's room, and the ranch that had been built as a punishment was becoming something else entirely. Elias, she said. Yes, he said. When this is done, she stopped, started again. When Doyle is dealt with and the legal situation is settled, and I have a real choice in front of me, not a choice made from necessity or fear or because there's nowhere else to go. He waited. I want you to ask me, she said, properly. He held her gaze. I intend to, he said. She nodded. She picked up what she'd been holding and finished clearing the table. The message reached Cotter through Tully at the general store on a Thursday. It was not from Ruth directly. It was from Aldridge, who had framed it carefully as a legal notification of the position Cotter occupied relative to a document he may have witnessed and what that position would mean if the document's authenticity was challenged in court. The message made no demands. It stated facts. It provided at the bottom an address where a response could be sent. They waited 5 days. On the 5th day, Aldridge came to the ranch again. He had a letter. He put it on the table. Clara and Elias read it together. Cotter had written 4 paragraphs in the careful handwriting of a man who had been composing this letter in his head for longer than 5 days. He stated that he had been present when a document was signed in Doyle's office. He stated the date of that signing. He stated that the document as presented to him for witnessing was described as a formalization of an existing verbal agreement. He stated that the date on the document as he witnessed it did not match the date on the document as he subsequently saw it referenced in legal correspondence. He was not. He wrote willing to testify to a date that was not the date he had witnessed. Aldridge set the letter down. "That's our case," he said. Clara let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "File it," Elias said. "I'll file tomorrow morning," Aldridge said. "The criminal fraud charges against you will be dismissed within the week. The counterfiling against Doyle will take longer, but with Cotter's statement," he paused, "Doyle is going to have a very difficult next several months." "Good," Clara said. What happened next happened faster than she had expected. The filing went in on a Friday. By Monday, word had moved through Red Hollow, the way word moved in a small Montana Territory town, total and immediate, with the specific quality of information that everyone had been waiting for, without knowing they were waiting for it. Doyle's response arrived not through a lawyer, but in person on a Tuesday morning with 2 men behind him. Clara saw them coming from the kitchen window. She went to get Elias. He was already coming in from the barn. He had seen the riders. "Ruth?" Clara said. Ruth appeared from the hall. "Stay inside?" Clara said. "No," Ruth said. Clara looked at her. "No," Ruth said again quietly. "I've been staying inside for 2 years." She met Clara's eyes. "If it's all right with you?" Clara looked at her for a moment. "All right," she said. All 3 of them went to the front of the house. Doyle stopped his horse in the yard. His 2 men stopped behind him. He looked at the 3 people on the porch of the Ward ranch with the expression of a man who had been outmaneuvered and knew it, and was here to see if the in-person version of the situation was different from the legal version. "Ward," he said. "Doyle," Elias said. Doyle looked at Clara, then at Ruth. Something moved through his expression at the sight of Ruth's surprise, and then the quick controlled adjustment of a man who has filed the surprise away for later use. "The filing is fraudulent," Doyle said. "Cotter's statement was coerced." "Cotter's statement was invited," Clara said. "There's a difference." Doyle looked at her. She held his gaze. She was standing on the porch of the ranch where she had arrived 6 weeks ago as someone being sold with the rifle behind her door and the horse in the barn, and the accounts in order, and Ruth beside her and Elias on her other side, and she felt not fearless. She was not without fear. Fear was useful, and she had learned to use it rather than be used by it. She felt completely clear. "Your document is forged," she said. "The date on it when Cotter witnessed it is not the date on it now. That's in Cotter's statement in his handwriting submitted to the court." She held Doyle's gaze. "There is no version of this that goes the way you planned. Not because you made an error. You're a careful man, Gerald. You don't make errors easily. But because you planned against what you thought we were, and you were wrong about what we are." Doyle looked at her for a long time. "You're 19 years old," he said. Not with contempt, with the flat specificity of a man stating something he is trying to reconcile with the situation in front of him. "Yes," she said. "I am." He looked at Elias. Elias said nothing. He stood beside Clara with the specific quiet of a man who has already said everything he needed to say through the legal filings and the lawyer and the statement that was already in the hands of the court, and who understands that the conversation currently happening is not the real conversation. The real conversation was already concluded. This was the aftermath. Doyle looked at Ruth. Ruth met his gaze. That took something. Clara could see it cost Ruth something specific and real to hold Doyle's gaze on the porch of a ranch she had reached by riding hard on urgency. But she held it. Doyle looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned his horse. He rode away. His 2 men followed. The 3 of them stood on the porch and watched him go. When the sound of the horses had faded, Ruth let out a breath that was several weeks' worth of held air. "That's not the end of it," she said. "No," Clara agreed. "But it's the end of this part." Ruth nodded. She went inside. Clara and Elias stood on the porch. "He'll try to discredit Cotter's statement," Elias said. "He'll try?" Clara said. "Aldridge is already prepared for that. The date discrepancy is in the physical document. That's not a matter of one person's word against another's. It's ink on paper." She paused. "He has nothing left that doesn't cost him more than gaining ground is worth." Elias was quiet for a moment. He looked at her sideways. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "You said to ask you properly when this is done," he said. She looked at him. "It's not fully done yet," she said. "The court process." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking yet." He held her gaze. "I'm telling you I'm going to, so you don't wonder." She held his gaze. "I wasn't wondering," she said. He looked at the yard where Doyle had ridden away from. Then at the barn where the gray mare was. Then at the house that was not a punishment anymore. That was something else, that had become something else, specifically because a woman with white knuckles and clear gray eyes had agreed to see what he actually did, rather than what he said. "I was a man serving a sentence," he said quietly, "when you got here." "I know," she said. "You didn't let me keep serving it," he said. "No," she said. "It was a waste of a good ranch." He looked at her. She looked back. "And a good man," she said, quietly, directly, the way she said everything. He held that. They went inside. Ruth had made coffee Clara had taught her, where everything was, in the second week of her arrival, naturally without formality. The way you shared a kitchen with someone who was staying, and the 3 of them sat at the table and drank it. And the kitchen was warm, and the December wind worked at the walls outside, and inside the ranch that had been built as a sentence, it was simply warm. Clara wrapped both hands around her cup. She thought about Doyle riding away. She thought about her father somewhere in Red Hollow, spending money not thinking about her. She had stopped waiting for that to change. It was not bitterness. It was the specific clean relief of releasing a thing you had been holding in a shape it was never going to take. She thought about the woman in the general store who had said good. She thought about the sequence of moves she had laid out on the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, and the way Elias had looked at it, and the specific satisfaction of a plan that had worked not because of luck, but because of thought. Real thought. The kind she had been capable of her whole life, and had never had the standing to use. "Elias," she said. He looked at her. "When the court process is finished," she said, "and everything is settled." She held his gaze. "I want to do something. Tell me," he said. She thought about Ruth, about the woman in the general store, about the specific face of a person who has been surviving rather than living, and has reached the end of their capacity to distinguish between the not just us and Ruth. A place where women who have nowhere to go can come and be somewhere. Clara held Elias's gaze across the kitchen table. "I want to make this ranch mean something beyond what happened to me here." Elias looked at her for a long moment. Ruth had gone still at the end of the table. "What would that look like?" Elias said. "Work," Clara said. "Real work, not charity. I know what charity does to a person's self-respect because I've lived inside the version of it that comes with conditions. I mean work that matters. The ranch has more capacity than 2 people can use. Ruth is already here. There are other women in this territory in the same position Ruth was in 2 weeks ago." She held his gaze. "We have land. We have the accounts to show it's viable. We have the legal standing now to defend it." "We," Elias said. "Yes," Clara said. Ruth looked between them with the expression of someone watching. Something become real in front of her. Elias looked at the table, then at Clara. "It would take more than the ranch currently produces," he said. not refusing assessing. She knew the difference. "I know," she said. "I've been looking at the accounts. The north pasture is being underused. If we bring in 2 more hands in spring and run cattle on the north line, the income increases enough to support the additional—" She paused. "The additional people." "You've already run the numbers," he said. "I run numbers when I'm thinking," she said. "It's how I think." He looked at her for one long moment. Then he said, "Show me." She got the accounts. They worked for 2 hours. Ruth sat with them and listened, and occasionally said something specific and practical from her 2 years of managing Doyle's household, which turned out to contain more relevant operational knowledge than any of them had initially credited. By the end of it, the shape of something was on the table. Not a plan, not yet, not fully, but the arithmetic of a plan. The numbers that said it was possible. Elias sat back. "When the court process is finished," he said. "When it's finished," Clara confirmed. He nodded once. That was enough. The court process finished in February. It took longer than Aldridge had projected, and shorter than Clara had feared. Doyle's lawyer fought the Cotter statement on grounds of duress, which failed when Aldridge produced the original message sent through Tully, formal factual, making no demands, offering no incentives, simply stating legal reality, and the court found it constituted neither coercion nor inducement. The forged document was ruled inadmissible. The criminal charges against Elias were dismissed. The counterfiling against Doyle for document fraud and abuse of legal process was accepted by the court, and a date was set for hearing. Aldridge rode to the ranch with the news on a Thursday afternoon in February, and Clara read the court documents at the kitchen table and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled since the night Ruth had arrived with wind-burned cheeks and a horse ridden too hard. "It's done," she said. "The fraud case against Doyle still has to go through," Aldridge said carefully. "I know," Clara said, "but the part that was about us is done." Aldridge looked at her with the expression he had worn in increasingly frequent increments since their first meeting in his office, the expression of a man recalibrating something he had initially assessed incorrectly. "Yes," he said. "That part is done." He left. Elias came in from the barn. She told him. He stood in the kitchen doorway and let it settle. Then he said, "Clara." She looked at him. He crossed the kitchen. He stopped in front of her. He was holding his hat in both hands the way he held things when his hands needed something to do while he said something important. "I told you I was going to ask you properly when this was done," he said. "You did," she said. "It's done," he said. She held his gaze. "I know what I am," he said. "And I know what I was when you got here. I was a man who had decided he didn't deserve more than the minimum and was living inside that decision." He paused. "You didn't let me keep doing it. Not by insisting. Not by arguing. Just by being what you are. Every day. In a way that made the minimum look like what it actually was." He held her gaze. "Insufficient." She waited. "I want to marry you," he said. "Not because you need protection. Not because the ranch needs managing. Because you are the only person I have ever met who sees exactly what something is and names it accurately, including me. And I have spent the last 4 months becoming a better man because someone was finally willing to see me clearly and not look away from what they saw." Clara looked at this man who had pushed through a crowd of 20 people because of white knuckles, who had given her a room with a latch on the inside, who had taught her to ride and to shoot and to carve the time for herself out of a life that had never offered it before, who had sat at 2 in the morning with legal documents and said "we" before either of them was ready to say what we meant. "Yes," she said. He let out a breath. "Yes," she said again. "And I want you to know why." He looked at her. "Not because you bought $40 worth of safety," she said. "Not because the ranch is a good place and you're a fair man. Those things are true, but they're not the reason." She met his eyes directly. "You asked me one question in the street that day. One question that nobody in 19 years had thought to ask me." She held his gaze. "The answer to that question is still yes. It will always be yes. And the man who thought to ask it is the man I want to spend my life answering it with." He stood very still. Then he put his hat down on the kitchen table and took her hands in both of his. And that was the proposal and the acceptance of Clara Mercer and Elias Ward, conducted in a Montana kitchen in February, without ceremony and without performance, in the specific direct and honest language of two people who had learned the hard way, and from different directions, to say exactly what they meant. Ruth, who had heard everything from the hall, went back to her room. She was smiling. They were married in the spring. Aldridge performed the ceremony. He held the requisite legal standing for it, and by that point had become the closest approximation of a family lawyer the Ward Ranch had, which meant Clara trusted him with the paperwork of the most important legal document she would ever sign. Vera from the general store came. She had heard about the court ruling in February and had subsequently shifted from neutral assessment to active support with the particular momentum of a woman who once decided was entirely decided. Tully came, and his wife, and the woman who had said good in the general store the first time Clara walked in, whose name Clara had learned was Mary, and who had a story she hadn't shared yet, but which Clara understood from the quality of her watching was in the same category as Ruth's. Ruth stood at Clara's side. The ceremony was short, honest, and accurate. 3 qualities both participants valued above all others. And when it was done, Clara stood in the yard of the ranch where she had arrived 6 months ago with a bag and white knuckles, and let the Montana spring air settle around her, and thought, this is what it feels like to be exactly where you are supposed to be. Not because someone put her here, because she had chosen it, every day, in every decision, in every account book, and every rifle shot, and every window latch, and every legal document, and every time she had said we, before she was fully certain what the word meant. She had chosen it. Elias came to stand beside her. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. He took her hand. She held his. The first woman came in April. Her name was Nora. She had walked 14 miles from a homestead 2 valleys over and arrived at the Ward Ranch with one boot held together with twine and the specific expression Clara recognized from the inside. She had heard through the particular word-of-mouth network of women in difficult situations that operates in every community, regardless of what the men in those communities believe, that there was a place in the foothills. Clara opened the door. "Come in," she said. Nora came in. That was how it started. Not with an announcement, not with a formal establishment. With a door opening and a woman coming in and Clara putting food on the table and Elias appearing from the barn and saying there's a room, and Ruth showing her where everything was because Ruth had been shown the same way and had found it the best way to be shown. The second woman came in May, the third in June. By summer, the north pasture was running the additional cattle Clara had projected in February, with 2 new hands she had interviewed and hired with the same systematic competence she brought to everything. The accounts had been reorganized into a system that could absorb the additional operational complexity of what the ranch was becoming. Ruth managed the household side of it with the specific authority of someone who has been given genuine responsibility for the first time and has understood exactly what to do with it. Elias expanded the fencing in July. Clara wrote to Aldridge about the legal structure of what they were doing, specifically what documentation was needed to formalize the arrangement in a way that protected the women who came and the ranch that received them. Aldridge by this point had stopped being surprised by anything Clara Ward asked him to research. He sent back a comprehensive response within a week. The town changed its mind about Clara Ward the way towns change their minds, not all at once, not with any announcement, but in the accumulated weight of small shifts that eventually added up to a new position. Vera had been the turning point. Once Vera Colton was publicly unambiguously on the side of what was happening at the Ward Ranch, the town's neutral majority began moving in the same direction. The court case against Doyle moved forward. He hired a second lawyer, and then a third. He produced counter-arguments and alternative interpretations and procedural challenges. He was a patient and well-resourced man, and he used every tool available to him. But the tool he had relied on most, the specific power of being the person in the territory who could define what other people were, who could make a girl a transaction, and a rancher a criminal, and a housekeeper a piece of property, that tool was gone. Because Clara had named it. Not in court, not in a legal document. In a street in Red Hollow, on a Tuesday in December, on a porch in front of 3 witnesses in the specific clear language of a woman who had decided that the accurate name for a thing was more powerful than the name other people put on it. She had named it, and it had lost its power. Doyle was found guilty of document fraud in October. The fine was substantial. The legal costs were more substantial. 2 of his 3 properties were sold to meet the combined obligations. He was not imprisoned. The territory's legal infrastructure in 1884 was not equipped for that outcome, but he was, as Clara had said, in February, no longer in a position where continuing cost less than stopping. He stopped. Cotter, whose statement had been the pivot of the entire case, left Red Hollow in the fall and went to Billings. He had a daughter there. He sent Clara a brief letter, 2 sentences that said, "I hope things are well at the ranch. I think I made the right call." Clara wrote back, "You did. Thank you for it." She meant both sentences equally. The letter she had not expected came in November. It came from Caleb Mercer. She recognized the handwriting, uneven. The handwriting of a man who had not written many letters in his life and did not find it natural. She sat with the envelope for a while before she opened it. It was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph said that he had heard about the court case and about the ranch and about what she had built there. He said he had heard it from multiple people in Red Hollow, and that was how he knew it was true, because when multiple people said the same thing, it was usually accurate. The second paragraph said, "I know I don't have the right to say anything to you, but I'm saying it anyway. You turned out better than anyone had a right to expect. Your mother would have said that different, but she would have meant the same thing." Clara read the letter twice. She sat with it for a long time. Then she folded it and put it in the box in the utility room, the same box that had fallen from the shelf and shown her Daniel's photograph and the carved horse, and told her the shape of what Elias was carrying. She put the letter next to those things, not because it was the same weight, but because it was a real thing from a real person, and real things deserved to be kept even when they were complicated. She did not write back, but she did not throw it away. That was the extent of her forgiveness, and it was genuinely meant, and it was enough. Elias found her in the kitchen afterward. He looked at her face. "Your father," he said, not a question. "A letter," she said. He waited. "He said I turned out better than anyone had a right to expect," she said. Elias was quiet for a moment. "He was right about that," he said. "He was wrong about the framing," she said. "I didn't turn out better than anyone had a right to expect. I turned out exactly as well as I had a right to expect. The expectation was just wrong." Elias looked at her. "Yes," he said. "That's right." She put the kettle on. He sat down at the table. Ruth appeared in the doorway. She did this in the evenings, drifted toward the kitchen in the way of someone who had learned that kitchens at the end of the day were where the real conversations happened, and said, "Nora's asking if she can try the north fence tomorrow." "She can try whatever she wants," Clara said. Ruth smiled. She went back to the hall. Elias looked at Clara. "She came here 3 months ago without one good boot," he said. "I know," Clara said. "And now she wants to work fence line." She brought the cups to the table. "That's what people do when someone treats them like they're capable of more." He picked up his cup. He looked at her. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "That first day," he said. "In the street. When I asked you that question." "Yes," she said. "I didn't know what I was doing," he said. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I had walked into a crowd I wasn't planning to walk into, and I said the first true thing I could find." "I know," she said. "And you looked at me," he said, "with those clear eyes, and you didn't answer." "No," she said. "Why not?" he said. He had never asked this directly. She had wondered when he would. She held his gaze. "Because nobody had ever asked me before," she said. "And I needed a moment to understand that the question was real." She paused. "That it wasn't a trick. That someone was actually standing in front of me asking what I wanted and meaning it. And when you understood it was real," he said. "I got in the wagon." she said. He held her gaze. Best decision I ever made, she said. He put his hand over hers on the table. She turned hers over. Years later, and there were many years. Good years. The kind built from the right materials by people who had learned the hard way what the right materials were. Red Hollow remembered the story differently than it had happened. Stories always changed in the keeping. What Red Hollow remembered was this. There had been a girl nobody wanted, and a cowboy nobody knew, and one question in the middle of a street that changed everything. What actually happened was more specific than that, and more ordinary, and more extraordinary at the same time. What actually happened was two people who had both been told they were worth less than they were, who had both decided on some level to accept that accounting, who had found each other at the exact moment when that acceptance was about to become permanent and had refused it. Together. Not because love solved things. Love did not solve things. The accounts still needed balancing. The fence still needed repairing. The legal system still needed navigating. The women who arrived at the Ward Ranch with one good boot, and the specific expression still needed feeding and housing, and the particular thing that was not charity, but was the accurate naming of their own capacity. None of that was solved by love, but it was done by people who had chosen each other, and that choosing made the doing possible in a way it had not been before. The women who came to the Ward Ranch in those years, and there were more every year, because word traveled through the specific network that women in difficult situations had always maintained and always would. Those women did not come because Clara Ward had saved them. They came because Clara Ward had built something that made saving yourself possible. Work, standing, the legal protection that Aldridge had helped formalize, the knowledge that someone would open the door and mean it when they said come in. Ruth managed the ranch's household operation for 4 years and then moved to Billings, where she opened a small boarding house for working women with a portion of the wages she had saved and the specific operational competence she had developed at the Ward Ranch. She wrote to Clara twice a year. Clara wrote back every time. Nora stayed. She became over years the ranch's best hand with cattle better than the men Elias hired, though no one said so loudly. And Nora said nothing about it either. She simply continued to be better, which was its own kind of statement. Cotter's daughter in Billings grew up and became a schoolteacher. Doyle moved to another territory and presumably started over because men like Doyle always found a new place to operate. But the territory he had operated in for 15 years knew what he was now, and knowing was not nothing. Caleb Mercer died in Red Hollow 3 years later in the specific, unremarkable way of men who had spent their lives at the bottom of bottles. Clara was told by Aldridge. She sat with the information for a day. Then she went back to the accounts because the accounts were real and required attention, and the past was the past, and she had made her peace with what she was willing to carry from it. Elias carved. He had started again in the first winter of their marriage, not the horse this time, not just memory, but new things. A bird for Ruth before she left. A small figure of a woman on a horse for Nora, which Nora kept on the shelf in her room, and looked at sometimes with an expression that did not require interpretation. He carved a box for Clara. He gave it to her on their 2nd anniversary, and she opened it, and inside was one thing, a small figure of a woman standing straight with her chin up, rendered with the specific precision of a man who had been looking at the person he loved very carefully for 2 years. Clara held it. She looked at it for a long time. "That's not what I looked like when I got here," she said. No, he said. "That's what you looked like about 3 days in, when you stopped waiting for the thing to go wrong." He held her gaze. "I've been wanting to make it since then." She closed her hands around the figure. She looked at her husband, the man who had asked one question in a crowd of people who weren't asking any questions, who had paid $40 and given her a room with a latch on the inside, and trusted her with his brother's name, and had said home out loud before he was certain it was his right to say it. "Elias," she said. "Yes," he said. "I want to tell you something I haven't said yet," she said. He waited. "When I was standing in that street," she said, "with my bag, and you came through the crowd." She paused. I saw your face before you saw mine. You were looking at my father and then at Doyle, and your expression was, I can't describe it exactly, but I thought that man is angry in a very quiet way. I was, he said. And then you looked at me, she said. And it changed. She held his gaze. I didn't know what the change meant. I didn't have words for it, but I felt it. And I thought before you even spoke, I thought this person sees me. He was very still. Not what I was worth, she said. Not what use I could be. Not what I owed or what I'd cost. Just me. She looked at the small carved figure in her hands. I didn't know what to do with that, so I didn't answer the question. And then you got in the wagon, he said. And then I got in the wagon, she said. He reached across and covered both her hands, the ones holding the figure, with both of his. Clara Ward, he said. She looked at him. You are the answer to a question I didn't know I was asking, he said. She held his gaze for a long time. Then she said, I know. You are mine. The Montana evening settled around the Ward Ranch, the house that had been built as a punishment and become a home. The fence that had been repaired and repaired again, the north pasture, running cattle under a wide sky. The kitchen warm with the specific warmth of a place that had been built by the right people with the right materials. In the room at the end of the hall, the Winchester was still there. Not because it was needed the way it had once been needed, but because it was hers, because she had learned how to use it, because a tool that belonged to you, and that you understood, and that represented the specific knowledge that you could defend. What you had built was not something you put away, simply because the immediate danger had passed. You kept it, because knowing you could was the whole point. The girl who had been sold in a street in Red Hollow, Montana on a Tuesday in 1883 had not been saved by a cowboy with $40 and a question. She had been given by that cowboy, and that question, and everything that followed from them, exactly one thing: the space to save herself. And she had used every inch of it. That was the truth of the Ward Ranch, and the truth of Clara Ward, and the truth that Red Hollow would tell differently for generations, softening it, romanticizing it, making it simpler than it was, but which was at its core immovable and plain. A person's worth is never decided by what someone else is willing to pay. And the life you build from nothing, with your own hands and your own clear eyes and your own refusal to accept the accounting that other people have assigned to you, is the only life that is fully, completely, irrevocably yours. Clara Ward knew this. She had known it since the moment she got in the wagon. She just hadn't had the space to live inside it until now, and now she did, and she intended to keep it.